I don't get it. How do they do that? How do they video it on Yom Tov? There wasn't a guy. It was an Israeli. Now, how does an Israeli have a heter to do it? How does an Israeli have a heter?
What's going on? Who is some
to video?
Who's that? Is that
I don't
Yehuda?
know. Probably I don't know. The guy. Where's my coat? I gave you your coat.
That way is good evening, Yehuda.
I'll be lying on you.
Hello, how are you?
Orsha, how's your Simchas Torah?
Yeah, all nice with you.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem.
Are you still singing the Chaim before you have the coke or not?
Hey, that's not good.
No, I'm going home.
Samech Daled Amud Aleph, third line from the top. Samech Daled Amud Aleph, third line from the top.
Hold on, where are we up to?
Samech Daled Amud Aleph. Actually, easy Gemara. Today's easy, and tomorrow's easy. Elo. Yeah, Elo Marava, very good. Yes. We had a story, very short story. A few Yiddish families were living with one Goyish family. Does anybody know the name of the Goy? Oh, Shomai, I haven't seen you since. How are you doing? Nice to see you back. Oh, Haman was his name. Teresa says Haman, our girl says Lachman. Okay. That was his name. Lachmanijad. Oh. What happened was, a few Yiddim with one guy, everybody agrees that you can't do it. Oh. A few Yiddim with one guy, everybody agrees you've got a problem. Because one Yiddim, one guy, we had a machlokas, if you remember. What was the basis of the machlokas? Because Yiddim don't normally live one Yid with one guy, except the Shali did Chazam make exer. But a few Yiddim with one guy is common. And since that's common, Chazal said you have to rent it. And the guy refused to rent it out to them. One Jew, one go is machlokas. We pass it's okay. Because the Yid won't want to live there because he's scared of being killed. No, so he'll move out quite quickly, so he won't be influenced. But
nowadays the problem, many Yiddim with one guy.
Yes, that is the same problem. That's right, exactly. Nowadays, if you, for example, that's why in Manchester, one of the problems in Manchester is that to make an Eiruvin, we have to rent from every single guy in Manchester. The way we do it is we rent from the fire department. They do actually from a few different places, the council, the fire department, the police, the army, and that way they cover themselves. That way it's not a problem. I mean, the truth is they did this years ago. It's not like as if Manchester's being made code. This is the halacha they did from a long time ago. Yes, the halacha, the idea of renting from the council or from the army is already not a, like... So what happened was there were many Yidden and one guy. And the question was, how can they make an Eiruvin? So ideally they would rent from the guy. The guy, being a Dafkanik, refused to rent. So Abai came up with a suggestion. Very good. They should do bittul. Everybody should cancel the reshus to one. And if you all cancel the reshus to one, then you only have one Yid and one guy. One Yid and one guy is okay. Then only he's allowed to. But that was Abai's suggestion. Roma didn't like it because it comes out a long-term problem. What's the long-term problem? People will forget the real halachas of Eiruvin and it's no good. So Roma did not like it. The guy goes away. Oh, so that'd be better. If it'd go away, that'd be the best. No, that's a very big problem. Now we'll discuss later. You have to change the person. Yes, you can change it on Shabbos, but let's see, you didn't. Okay. So Rav is going to suggest another solution. And here we see an inkling, a little remiss, this idea that renting from the fire department is good enough. From this Gemara, you'll see. One of the Yidden should go, become a good friend of this guy, and ask him, can I borrow a small place? And then leave something in the guy's property. Money either. So one Yid should become friendly, ask him, can I have permission to leave something in your house? Once you have permission to leave something in his house, then what happens is, the halacha is, that let's say there's a guy, and the guy employs dozens of people. You're allowed to go to just one of the workers and say to him, will you rent me some of the property? Now, what's the right of the goy? He's a worker for the goy.
Giving you his right.
Right, very good. So let's example, you got a goy, call him John. He's got 10 workers. You don't need to go to John to get the rental. You can go and say to one of the workers, give me a right. Let me rent from you. So the same thing over here. One of the Yidden should become friendly with the goy, ask for permission to put something down, then become a work, then considered like a worker, and then you can rent from the Yid. That's right. Very good. And he can give permission to the Yidden. Exactly. Even a worker can put an Eruv, and that's good. So from here we see that you can just get the worker of the good, and that's good enough. Abai suddenly got nervous. What happens if the guy has more than one worker? Do you need to get permission from every worker? That means we just said a kula that you don't need to rent directly from the guy. You can rent from a worker of the guy. Abai came along concerned that it could come out to be a chumrah. What's the chumrah? What happens if the guy has many workers? Do you have to get all the workers? So they said it as a kula. Are they going to make it as a chumrah? Of course, you don't need to ask them all. One of them is enough. You don't need to ask every single one of them to get permission. So therefore, one worker is good enough. Okay. Gufa. Even a worker, schira is an employee. That's somebody that you pay by the hour. Lekitoi is somebody that you pay for the job, for the harvest. Leket, right? Schira is a soch. So either one, that's a brilliant idea. He liked it. He thought that was a good halacha. That you can use the guy's worker to do it. The Gemara then, this is what Yehuda said in Shmuel. What? Rashi that the workers, we talk about a worker that he has to be part. He comes into the guy's house because he needs to put schayr down. We talk about like what? Like a cleaner. Like a cleaner. No. Very good. That's a good question. He does not need reshus from the guy. He doesn't need to ask his boss. Since he works in the guy's house, so therefore he's got access to the guy's house. Now, this is what Yehuda Mashmol told him this halacha. Now we've got another halacha. If you drink a cup of wine, you shouldn't pass them. I was once in the Rav's house. It was Friday night, and the man came knocking on the door. I took my cholent off. It happens all the time. I thought it was chicken soup. I put it down. Can I put it back? The halacha is actually yes. But the person I can't pass because I've just drank kiddush of of wine. But what I can do for you is I'll show it to you inside, and the Mishnah talks about it, and then you can read it for yourself. It's very important to remember. Once you drank your wine, you can't. Oh, Nachman. Oh, you're going to like this next command, which is very short. Nachman didn't like it. Why? Why didn't he like it? Do I know? Till I've drunk a reverse of wine, I can't think straight. Says Nachman, I don't like this kabbalah. I don't like this halacha. Until I drink a reverse of wine, I don't think straight. What? So he said to me, you shouldn't speak like that. You're not allowed to say, I like that shikotur and I don't like that shikotur. Why? Simple translation of the pasuk is that somebody who grazes, means somebody who lives amongst zoinos, will lose his wealth because he'll spend all his money wasting it on prostitutions. Therefore, living amongst them is a sure way to lose his money. And the Gemara dashes it. So the word zoinos, we're reading it as zu noi. Zoinos, zu noi. This is nice, and this one's not nice. Yabed hoin will lose wealth. Which wealth are we discussing? The wealth of Torah. Says so interesting. Ben Yehuda asks the question that this pasuk is referring to something which seems to be very different from the. We always like to find how the drush and the pshat go together. The pshat in pasuk is that somebody who lives among zoinos will lose his money. And if we're darshaning it that somebody who says this Gemara is good, this one's not, will lose the wealth of Torah. So what's the connection? It's a very interesting thing. It says that what happens is the Yitzhak makes it that you think to yourself that you do znus with one woman, that would be enough. What does the Yitzhak do? He says to you, no, this one's nice. And then what happens is he says, this one, he even says very special, this one's that color hair, this was that color, this was that size, this that size, etc. And then what happens is you start differentiating, that was good, that wasn't good, that was good, that wasn't good. And meanwhile, you end up spending a very lot of money. And what you don't realize is that you could really find pleasure with one woman if you devote yourself to that wife. You would be happy, and you wouldn't need to go and say this one's good. Because he says every woman can be beautiful in the eyes of her husband. He says the same thing with Torah. You think it's no good. But that doesn't mean it's no good. You have to be aware that somebody else who sees that same shtickle Torah will enjoy it. Now, Chaim writes in his Akdama, in Be'emar Chaim, he writes that he sees many times that people walk out of a drasha. He says, well, the biggest averse they do is they say that they hate the drasha, the bad person can't speak well. What they have to understand is just because you didn't enjoy it doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't enjoy it. That's why it's the same thing. Wouldn't be, it would be us. So the pasuk is telling people off. Why is it? What do you mean? So therefore, yeah. It's very hard to understand why the originally allowed it. The answer is that there was a time when the whole relationship was a bit different, and therefore there was like the man was a higher level. It is interesting. It is not an easy thing to defend, the fact that the Torah allows many wives, how it all works. Okay, but the Maisa, it's an interesting machlekes over here. The one says, Amalei Hadrubi, I changed my mind. So Vashik, so what did he change his mind? That I'll no longer say that's a nice shikutah, that's not nice shikutah. Many times the children come home, they say it's about Torah. You shouldn't say that's a nice one, it's not a nice one. Anyway, you shouldn't for chinuch purposes, but you know. The machlekes Marsho, what? You should always say it's nice. Sorry, I'm not finished. The Marsho and the Ben Ish Chai. The Marsho says that the Ben Ish Chai says you're not allowed to say this is nice. Why shouldn't you say this is nice? Because by saying this is nice, people will say, Marsho says, no, you're allowed to say this is nice. You're just not allowed to say this is not nice. And he says, he brings different mayas, that many times the Gemara says that somebody said, wow, I really like that shtickle too. So it's an argument over here. I mean, like this. I don't know. It's because that's not how they spoke. They said, wow, look at this shtickle. That means Ben Ish Chai says, you're not allowed to say this is good at it, because he says that's part of the question. Zuna, that's not good. So the question, when he was chayzer about both, or was he just chayzer? That means, was he chayzer about criticizing one, or was he chayzer even by complimenting the first? Now, since we mentioned this Gemara about shikr, we're going to have a very long sugya about getting drunk. Very long sugya about it. The Gemara is like this. Shosu al yispalel, a person who's drunk should not daven. When yispalel, tefillah say tefillah, if it's tefillah, tefillah works. But shikr, somebody who's properly drunk, there's shosu, somebody who drinks a bit. Shikr al yispalel, when yispalel tefillah say teiva, his tefillah is an abomination. So it says, where is the defining line between a shosu and a shikr? There were two Talmidei Chachamim. It's a very famous Gemara. There were two Talmidei Chachamim, one was called Abba Bar Shumni, and one was called Menashe Bar Yirmiyah. And they would meet up and say bye-bye on a certain bridge. And whenever they would say bye-bye to each other, each one of us, tell me a Dvar Torah which you've never heard of before. Because if you tell me a Dvar Torah you've never ever heard before, what do you get? Whenever you say bye to a friend, I don't remember having it. Oh, you did? I had them bochos. I don't remember having it. You remember it? Very good. It says on the side, I never noticed. Wow. So do you remember then? I remember discussing once, looking it up. The Gemara says, whenever you say bye to a friend, you should always say it with a halacha. That way you'll remember. What will you remember? It's machlekes and mafashim. Some say you'll remember the halacha, because what will happen is whenever you recall the friend, you'll remember the last halacha my friend told me was this, that. Alternatively, you'll remember your friend, because by remembering the halacha, you remember. The question is, what's more important? You're trying to memorize the friend or the halacha. The Mashal says, by the way, a very, very small thing. Mashal says, if you say bye to your friend, you shouldn't say bye to your friend unless there's a halachic reason that you should. That means, for example, let's say we're learning together. I've got to go to a chasna, I've got to go to a mitzvah or something like that. Which reminds me that I shouldn't say this for sure, but tomorrow I've got a bar mitzvah. And I hope very much we're back in time. If not, somebody else will give this show instead. Either Sufa or I go.
What time do you have the mitzvah?
This is tomorrow evening, tomorrow afternoon.
Why can't we do it before or do it on YouTube?
It's in Gateshead. The mitzvah's in Gateshead.
Oh, we can do it. You can take it with you.
No.
Good excuse to
Okay,
get
okay,
out the
let's-
Joshers. Engage it every like a million.
If I'm driving, how can I do it? I'm hoping to drive back in time. I was going to drive fast. I can't see. I don't know. Either I go back or Sufa.
Which Rabbi Goldberg?
I go back.
I'm not doing nothing.
What? Are you not allowed out of town?
No, you're a broker. Northeast.
I'll be in Gates.
We'll go to Gates. Oh, you're scared Gates?
I'm driving past Gates.
You are?
Yeah.
I'm taking from the kids. Okay. Okay, so that is bad for we should have stopped. Again, the Gemara says when you say right to your friend, you should only do it with halacha, meaning for the halachic reason. You shouldn't split up unless you have halachic reason to move out. Okay. So the Gemara says like this. What halacha can you say? If you can speak in front of a king, that's considered shosu, that's a bit drunk. So if you're a bit drunk, you can still speak in front of a king, that's okay. But if you can't speak in front of a king, then you're so far gone that you can't speak in front of a king, then you're not allowed to daven. The Gemara describes now a variety of people who earned money from a very, very easy way, or in a way which makes people more likely to be jealous. What's nowadays would be, for example, winning the lottery. Those who didn't have lottery, so we have similar examples. The problem with winning the lottery is that people have ayin hara. When people see you doing well financially, people get very jealous. Oh, no. If you work at a minimum wage for 20 years, and what happens is, because of that you build up a tiny bit of money, people get less jealous than if you win a lottery. It is true they'll get jealous either way, but less.
They're jealous of the instant success.
That's right. Because of that, so therefore it is necessary to do something as a protection for your money. What's good protection? The Gemara discusses this. The Marshal learns the whole Gemara slightly. This is how Rashi explains it. The Marshal understands the Gemara like this: that when a person has success easily, he's prone to make the mistake of believing that he's brilliant and that he's clever and therefore he managed to make the money easily. So therefore, that's why he has to do something to remind himself that HaKadosh was in charge. Why not?
You know definitely yourself.
Maybe the lottery is not such a good example, but even with the lottery, you think to yourself, maybe you're special. Okay. So the also like this. In those days, the way to earn money quickly, easily, was to find somebody who was a ger. A ger, we had this before a few times actually. A ger, what happens to a ger? If he's got shorts, the shorts you get it. Right, it's free fall. So that's it. So if your person was machzik with this again, what should you do? That you should keep the money. Afilu, if Sheshus holds like you, Moshe, a little bit, that it's not just people get jealous. Oh, but maybe it was Khaled who said, not just get jealous of people getting instant success, even milder success, people get jealous. More says, top self-down base. Even a husband with his wife's property, let's say a man gets a very good dowry, or his wife does very well, people get jealous because he didn't do any work, and suddenly you become wealthy. So it's difficult. No, it's difficult for other husbands. The things are self-certain. Even if a person did a business deal and became very wealthy, people get jealous. Even if you find a lost item, all these things can cause problems. Yeah, I mean, the case, but they're all smaller in scope. I mean, this guy, what happens is he's got a property, and all you had to do was just be there when he died, and you got it. Why? If you feel a little bit, you worked harder, you got married to, etc. So Moses says, even tefillin is good enough. So it's an important message. There are many, many people that when they get to Yerusha, what do they do with the Yerusha? They buy a Sefer Torah. And this is the makor for it. That if a person does get success, a big financial windfall, he should do a mitzvah with it. For two reasons. One reason is it causes a protection. It's a shmir for his money from the jealousy of others. That's one reason. It means it's a jealousy is causing it a shmir, extra shmir. And the second reason is simply that to remind oneself that Shmuel is in charge, and therefore the money comes from him, and not to think that. Where do we see that in the Torah? What happened was Kaisel made the native when they were fighting Canaanim, that you will give you all the money that we get from this battle as long as we're successful in other battles. So they see that by promising a small amount of tzedakah, they were hoping to keep and to safeguard the majority, that is, the lives on future battles. Now we continue with our halachas of the person. Milk. First walks a mill. Beshina kolshu, or sleeping a little bit. Mafigenes hayayin, take away the hashpos, the influence of wine. So if a person's feeling drunk, what should you do? Walk for a mil, that is about a kilometer, or go for a sleep. Only if he's drank a revis. If you drink more than a revis, that means what happens is like this. When the more you drink, actually, then you get like woozy. Once you drink a very lot, then going for a sleep, you could get deeply asleep to the extent that you won't fall asleep at all. And similarly, by a walk. So therefore, if you small a small amount of wine, a journey can help you, but not if it's a large amount of wine. So it says like this. Does a mill get rid of the wine? This is a long story. He was riding on a donkey. It was going from Akko to Gziv. Abeloi walked behind him. Gamliel was on the donkey, and Abeloi walked behind him. He found a loaf of bread on the journey. Pick it up from the journey. As we will learn later, one should not leave bread on the floor. It's bizoyin oichim. You have to be careful saying oichim. I was very relieved. I saw a tshuva from Shuvzam, because I many times see food on the floor. No way to pick it up all the time. Only if it's somebody would eat it. Only if somebody would be happy to eat it. If somebody's not happy to eat it, it's not necessary. What? No, there's two things. Not walking on food is even if you're not planning to eat it. Even crumbs are not supposed to. And so there's a mitzvah because it's bizarre to walk past to leave it there. So pick it up. He saw a guy. That means Gamliel was on the donkey. Yehuda was walking behind him, and there was a guy. He met a guy. So he said to the guy, Mavgoi, means he knew the guy's name without asking. Can you imagine? He had such ruach hakodesh. He knew the guy's name without asking. He called him by his name. His name was Mavgoi. You can take the bread. You can keep the bread. So Bloi went up to the guy quietly. Where are you from? I come from a settlement of huts. I mean, not from a famous town. What's your name? Mavgoi Shmeini. My name is Mavgoi. Has Gamliel ever met you before? Never met me before. We see Gamliel had ruach hakodesh. This is interesting. No, first Gamliel said there was two different people, because he wanted to know if indeed was his name. Gamliel told the Yehuda by Eloi, that guy called Mavgoi should take your bread. So he went up to me, asked him, what's your name? He said, Mavgoi. Did Gamliel ever meet you before? He said, no. So he realized that Gamliel had ruach hakodesh, but he was confirming Gamliel's name for him. I find it interesting that Tesis tells us that Mavgoi was quite a popular name. Oh, Ivan or something. It says, well, what's got
to do with walking a mill?
Oh, we're going to see the whole thing. Yeah, we always fish stuff. It's easy enough. We learned three things from that story so far. We learned that you don't go past food and leave it on the floor. Bread specifically. Yeah. So we learned another thing is that you go after the majority goyim, meaning like this. Why did Gamliel tell him to give it to the goyim? Why did he tell him to eat it himself? Why couldn't Yehuda eat it himself? Why did he have to give it to the goyim? Oh, because it's probably not kosher. So why? Because the majority of the people living around were goyim. So it was choshesh that it's not kosher. So we see we go after Rov Goyim. If you don't go after Rov people, if you go after the miut, what would the halacha be? You'd be allowed to eat it. Now we're not discussing give you a pas akum that we're used to, where we know the ingredients are kosher. The problem is the goy baked. Here we're discussing that we're not sure if the ingredients are kosher, and that's why he was machmir. We don't know what the bread is made out of, so he went after the Rov. Yes. I know, it's the whole Gemara on Chulin. It's fascinating Gemara that if you get a piece of food where the majority of chances are that it's kosher, you're allowed to eat it. We go after it. It's a fascinating Gemara. There's a whole sugi about it. We would never be like, you find a piece of meat on the floor, what talks about. And most of the butchers in town are Yidden. Even though let's say there's 30-40% goyim, 67% Yidden, you can just eat the piece of meat and cook it because V'lomanu, the third thing we learned, the first thing we learned is you shouldn't eat bread on the floor. You go after Rov Goy. V'lomanu, we also learn meaning like this: giving it to the Goy gives a Yid a certain pleasure. What pleasure do you get giving a present to a Goy? He's beholden to you. Now, if it's chelmetz, you can, if thereby you'll get him benefit. So over here, this Goy, he was giving it to the Goy. How can he give it to the Goy? Maybe it was after Pesach, this story. And maybe this bread was there from before Pesach. Maybe it belonged to a Goy during Pesach, and therefore it's Asa Ba'ano. So we learn over here that chametz which a Goy owns over Pesach is not Asa Ba'ano, it's Mutter Ba'ano, and that's why he was allowed to give it to the Goy, even though he gained from it, the Goy was beholden to him. We're continuing the story because we want to get to the story about how it's got to being shikah. When they reached the town of Kziv, somebody came to ask him to do Ataras Nadon. He asked him, have we drunk any wine? He wasn't sure if he had drunk wine because he was so fatigued in his learning. The Mepharshim would say they didn't know if he had drunk wine. It was like, I just won't go with someone. Yes, we have drunk wine. So he said, well, if that's the case, I can't pass him Cain. He should follow us until the wine influence has gone away. 3 mil. If you remember earlier, how much mil did we say you have to do when you drink? 1 mil, very good, which is 4 kilometers. He made him walk 3 mil, which is 12 kilometers. Sorry. 1 mil is 1 kilometer, 3 mil is 3 kilometers. Oh, very good, we'll see in a minute. But otherwise, at that moment, we've got a question. Earlier, we were told that 1 mil is enough. Actually, get a sumo till he came to the cliff top of Tzur. Came off the donkey. With this atef, he wrapped himself with a talis. In those days, Rabbanim would wrap himself with a talis for 2 reasons. One is because of Eimas Hadin, Pachat of Yura Shemayim, that they were passing something. And the second thing is when you're wearing a talis, you can't see to your right and your left. If you're focused on your thoughts. So he wrapped himself up in the talis. And what did he do? I lost the place. We learned many other things from this story. We learned that just one reverse of wine is enough to make a person shikah. We learned from there that a person is shikah can't pass it. That going on a walk gets rid of the influence of wine. We see he wasn't matting the doim when he was on the donkey. He came off the donkey, sat down, and matting the doim. You can't do it when you're walking. Says the Gemara. That's the end of the story and the end of the brisa. Asks the Gemara the question. We said 3 million, and earlier we said only 1 million. Answers the Gemara. That wine, Italian wine, is much, much stronger. The Gemara, Italian wine is stronger. If he drank more than the reverse, we said that when you go for a walk, you become even more tired and even more confused. So if a reverse of wine and italki makes a person even more shikah, so what should he do? So they said walking, it's riding shouldn't work. So Gemara says, riding doesn't make a person confused. Riding just clears the mind. Riding clears mind. The Gemara says, well, Hashados is lucky. We said, now that we've come to this chiluk, we should walking and riding. Riding is different. We have two completely different answers regarding the 1 mil, 3 mil contradiction. Rav Nachman told us if you drink a verse of wine, how far do you have to walk? A mil, 1 kilometer. About, there's a fox, but a mil is 2,000 amas, which is about 1.2, it's between 1 to 1.2 kilometers. Rav Gamliel went for 3 mil contradiction. The second answer, the Gemara, is the easier one. What's the second answer? Is that if you're walking, you need to do 1 mil. You're riding on a donkey, you have to do 3 mil, as you can see. When you're riding, you're not doing much moving, it's much easier. So 3 mil of riding is equal to 1 mil of walking. That's the second answer. The first answer was slightly more complicated. The Italian wine makes a person even more shikar, and therefore 1 mil is not enough. It says, well, if it makes it even more shikar, so then walking should be no good. So the Gemara says, no, riding is good. So riding works even though when a person gets more shikar from Italian wine, it has the ability to clear one's mind. That's it, even if not doing more movements. The Afkimina would be, what happens if a person doesn't drink Italian wine? He just drinks normal wine more than a reverse. According to the first answer, the Gemara, riding is good enough. According to the second answer, perhaps not, only if it's a reverse wine, but more is not. Nice, we passed. According to the first answer, the Gemara, it doesn't matter, always works. According to the second answer, the Gemara, only up to a reverse, not more. So now the Gemara, we started talking about the halacha of Shiur v'likitub, which Rav Nachman mentioned. Rav Nachman praised that Gemara, but was not happy with the other Gemara, which talks about being shikar. So then we discussed halachas of being shikar, and now we brought a price that discusses Gamliel passing the halacha when he was shikar, when he had drunk some wine. Now we're going on to Hataras Nadon. Says the Gemara, Eini, is it true? V'omar Rav Nachman, why did you have to come off the donkey when Nachman passed? That you're allowed to do Hataras Nadon while you're walking, while you're sitting, while you're riding. So if imagine that Ben's riding on a bike and somebody comes past him and says to him, hey, I made a neder, what should I do? So while he's riding, he can say, Mutaloch, Mutaloch, Mutaloch. So remember that. Actually, you have to have 3 people. Okay, but it's not like Gamliel came off donkey. Says Lo Tanoi. When a person makes a neder, do you need to find a reason to undo the neder, or is it good enough just to say Motalach, Motalach? Do you have to make him regret it or without regret? That's the machlokes. So therefore, the machlokes says if you need them to come up with a regret, so you need to discuss it with them, and therefore you have to come off your donkey because when you're riding on a donkey, your mind is not settled, so you have to sit down. If you don't need chavata, you can just undo it without chavata, so there's no problem doing it while you're riding on the donkey. So the machlokes as to whether you need chavata or not is the machlokes to whether you need to come off the donkey. If you hold that you don't need chavata, you don't need to come off the donkey. If you need chavata, you need to come off the donkey. Says the Gemara. What did he say to this person that made the neder? He said like this: Yesh boita, there's someone who speaks kemat kois cherev, like stabbing of the sword. Veloshin chachamim marpe, the tongue of Talmidei Chachamim heals. The simple pshat in the pasuk is as follows: there are some people that every word they say is like a shtech, like a stab. So there are some people that their speech is like the stabbing of a sword. But Talmidei Chachamim, when they speak, a person who serves Hashem, when he speaks, his words are healing words, they're kinding words, they're comforting words. That is the pshat in the pasuk. He dashed it in a different way. Anybody who speaks should be stabbed. Meaning that anybody who makes up the doim without thinking should be stabbed. But the words of the Chachamim can heal him. Why? Because they can be matinated. Meaning like this: a person who makes the doim without thinking deserves a big punishment. Why does he have a big punishment? Because he's making the doim and afterwards he can't keep to it. And Rashenkin afterwards, Rosh Chachamim Marpe. I had in my shul, I was very upset, I stopped it eventually. Normally I don't like to do something anymore. We started getting boys to bid, and I hope they don't do it in this so get upset for Shnayas and Dapim and all kinds of things to get Galila and Hokafas and everything else. I said it's the children are a bit tired. And what happens is they won't remember it. Why should they be even Svichas Torah? They don't just give them the Galila without all this fuss. If you want, you can do it with money, because money is easier for us. But this is something I remember, I don't forget, it was years ago, David and Kiad Sefer. And what happened was, I was living there, so I lived in there so many years. I only kept one day Yom Tov. Second day Yom Tov was for me a weekday. But for the people who came, a lot of people would come for. Nowadays it's less and less. But there was a time where people would get like kehillas coming from Gateshead and from Manchester to Kiryat Sefer for Pesach and Sukkot. So second day Yom Tov for them was Yom Tov. So I went. There was big rabbonim there. You had like a big Talmidei. So they sold Chosan Torah for daf. And one person promised to learn I don't know how many thousand daf. And I met him like a few months later. Oh, he said, no, you can't do it. It's much too difficult. And then I said, what kind of thing is that? You make a nade on Simchas Torah, then you can't. It's not a way to be. A person has to have responsibility. So Yeshboit, the person speaks up, Kivat Kol is Cherem. That it's establishing. It's not a bit Gnevis. It's not. It is a bit of a they can hear it. So I said to them, I feel that it's and people. What? What happens is people feel that if you get children to learn more, it's better and better and better. It's a stammer mistake in chinuch because it doesn't help the long term. Getting a child, it's not. Okay, so that was the end of the Hatoras Nedoim. And that was the end of the story. Now the Gemara says, by the way, in the story we mentioned that you mustn't leave food on the floor. Why? They saw putis b'chshafim, they didn't do so much witchcraft. In later generations, nowadays, they saw putis b'chshafim, you leave it on the floor. They had a certain kind of witchcraft that if you pick up bread, which they did witchcraft on, you'd be stuck to your place. That was the witchcraft. That's what Moshe says. Therefore, if you see bread on the floor, leave it on the floor. Now, what happens is like this. They would only do the witchcraft on a whole loaf of bread. If you see a half a loaf of bread, you can take it. Why? Because they will never do witchcraft on half a loaf of bread. They only do witchcraft on a whole loaf of bread. It's like witchcraft they consider to be a precious skill. There wouldn't be mezalzel in the skill to do it to something. Do they not do witchcraft on a slice of bread? It says in the Apostle, you profaned me, you did a chilul Hashem. That is, had fistfuls of barley, and pieces of bread. So there they did a chilul Hashem. They would do all kinds of bad behavior on small pieces of bread. So you see that they did do witchcraft on small pieces of bread. And small hospital shakti bag value. They don't do the actual witchcraft on a small piece of bread, but they would get paid with pieces of bread. Let me like this. There's two parts to witchcraft. There's the actual act of witchcraft that they only do on a loaf of bread, but they'll get paid for the witchcraft on a small. I want to do a bit more of the Gemara, just a little bit. Since we talked about being a shikha, we talked about a little bit more about being shikha. It's a longer daf. I can make everybody potter for all the Averos they've ever done since the Churban Beis Hamikdash. Can you imagine if anyone would have done that? All the Averos since the Churban Beis Hamikdash, we shouldn't get punished for. Why should we get punished? The afflicted one, the shechoves one's drunk, there's such a thing as being drunk from wine, and there's being drunk from grief. When a person's very sad, to be drunk from grief. He's like completely not able to focus. The Pasuk describes Klal Yisrael by the Churban as being those who are so anguished that they are drunk from anguish. So if we're drunk, so we're not capable of making right decisions, so we're part from all our veils. Fade the Gemara, Meisvei, Shiko, a person who's drunk, Mikcha, Mekach, Mimkoi, Mimka, of our veils, Shishve, Misa, Misa, Noisei, Malkus, Malkin, Noisei, Krolish, Tova, Ukipikach, Lechol, Dolo. Now, Elosh, bottom that tefillah. We have a brisa that says that if a person's drunk and he sells something, the sale is valid. And if he buys something, the buy is valid. And if he does an avir of Chil Shabbos, he gets death penalty. And if he does malchus, he gets malchus. Meaning, we're not talking about somebody properly drunk. We're talking about somebody who's just had a cup of wine. Somebody who's properly drunk will see differently. But somebody who's had a cup of wine, there's a famous medrash about one of the people in the days of the Hashmonoim that put out a fire when he was semi-drunk, and they wanted to put him to death, except there was no Eidim. So they didn't. But it's an interesting medrash. But the point is, if a person's drunk a cup of wine, that's not drunk, is not the right word. Tipsy is a better word. He didn't have Eidim. That's why. Look, the medrash says he was drunk. But the Medrash says the fact that he was drunk was not a p'tur, not drunk. Because drunk, we use the word drunk nowadays as somebody who's drunk. I talk about somebody who's had a cup of wine. Let's go. Somebody who has drank a cup of wine. That's better. Intoxicated is properly drunk, let's call it, and drunk is something who's a bit drunk. Is that the right way?
Tipsy.
Other way around.
Is that the way around? Okay. So the Ma'aser, the Gemara says, how can he say that all the people from the time of the Chumash Midrash are potter for their averos? No, they're not potter for their averos, because we just said that somebody who's drank a cup of wine, his sells and his buying and his averos are all his. And says the Gemara, only from davening. That means the fact that we have davened properly since the base of Midrash was destroyed till today is because we've drunk. Just 2 more lines. The person is properly drunk, is not aware of what he's doing, then he's part from everything. So we're going to stop here. I went a bit over that. I thought it's good for somebody, the next person to start, to have a proper place, 2 dots. That's how I want to get to me. Again, I don't know who will be tomorrow. Hopefully me, but again, it's a bar mitzvah of my nephew, my wife. Very keen. Yes, Master. We should have some.
You won't tell anyone, mate.
Oh, no, I don't know. What's illegal about? I mean, making a mitzvah. I'm not told you where it is. Only 6 people are going to be there. No, there'll be 6 lost. It's a beautiful story about Yehuda Steinberg. What? Yes, unbelievable story about Bali.